Hi and welcome to this strategic series. In this series of videos, I'm going to be showing you how to deploy. So in this video, I want to show you how to defend against an Alpha Strike from a very hard-hitting, fast-moving and long-distance covering combat unit. So I've got here a unit of Shining Spears. Shining Spears have, and I'll go over their abilities in a moment, but they represent so many things in the game. They represent double moving Gene Stealers, or Gene Stealers that can advance in charge. They represent Harlequin bikes that can advance in charge. Anything that has, maybe 12 to 22-inch movement and also can charge at the end of that. So these guys can do exactly that. They move 16 inches, they can advance 6 inches automatically, and also they can then play a stratagem to allow them to charge after they've advanced. So these are an absolute deadly unit, and especially when I've got my tank commander or a unit that is unable to fall back and shoot, because that is going to take him out of the game. So I want you to imagine that these Shining Spears are on their deployment board or their edge, and I've been really unfortunate enough to go second, okay? So I need to make sure that when I'm deploying, I deploy my tank commander as far away as I possibly can in order to keep him safe. But remember, from the first video, I still need to remember the three main principles. And that is putting a unit out of line of sight, putting a unit out of range, and putting a unit in cover. So if you want to go get yourself, a table set up and get certain models just to represent this, definitely do so. And if you also need a notebook, go and do that as well. That's just going to give you a good amount of time to make sure that you've got everything you possibly need. And also you can actually have a bit of a run through and a play and start to measure some things out so that when you get to the tabletop, this all isn't new. Now, one of the things that you need to find out from your opponent is ask them, do you have any units that can advance in charge? That is a really good question just to ask somebody without asking too many questions. You don't want to ask absolutely everything about an army, but knowing if something can advance in charge is a really good, a really good question to ask, just because you then know if that is going to be a combat threat. So I got a couple of options. Now, for example, the worst case scenario is I deploy my entire army, assuming I'm going first, and then my opponent seizes on me. So that means that my tank commander could be out of position potentially. Or essentially I'm not going to know where these Shining Spears are going to go. Maybe they use the redeploy stratagem. Maybe they're Gene Stealers and they've popped up from somewhere and they're double moving because they've got a Swarm Lord. So what I'm going to do is a couple of things. Again, I still need to remain and keep the principles the same, and that's to keep him out of line of sight and out of range. But the problem here is that these Shining Spears can move 22 inches. So that literally gets them to here. Now remember, a unit can only, so what I can do obviously is pre-measure this, and I would definitely advise you to do so. So measure their original starting position and then just put down dice when you're deploying your army roughly where a unit could go. And then I know that in order, if they want to touch this tank, they're now going to need a 12-inch charge. So that's from this current position. So simply what I would need to do is just move him back 1 inch. Now what I've done is I've put him 12 inches away and out of charge range. So I've completely protected myself from this unit's total move and advance, and I'm outside of 12 inches. If there's no possible way that I can get him outside of that 12 inches, then even by putting him just within, I'm still forcing my opponent to make an 11-inch charge, which is highly unlikely. Now, you always run the risk, because I think a lot of people would have actually put a unit to screen. And what they end up doing is, the problem with having a screening unit is now, if these guys were here to screen out from the commander, now my opponent only needs 6 inches charge. Okay? And then what can happen is, if then this guy or this unit pile in and kill this entire unit off, and then within 3 inches, so they kill the entire unit off, this unit can then consolidate 3 inches towards the closest model, get within an inch, and now they've just tagged my tank. So by actually having this screen here was actually the worst thing I could have done. So I want to make sure they're well out of range. Now, bikes are unable to fight through terrain, so what you want to make sure that you do is, if you have a terrain piece, and I'll show you this way, you have your guys over an inch away from the edge of the scenery piece. That means that the bikes, which are fast moving options or vehicles, are unable to just touch the terrain, because if you are able to touch the terrain, if you're touching the terrain and then the bikes charge the piece of terrain, they're now within an inch to fight you. So you just want to make sure that you are, and this is a top tip, just make sure you're 1 inch away from the edge, and then that way you can put whatever it is valuable in that side. Okay, so that's one option that you can do with the bikes. However, something like Genestealers that are an infantry unit that can just run through the ruins, again, by having, you know, that unit 5-6 inches closer, I'm now going to basically allow them to have a much easier charge. So the other option is, some units have an even faster movement and they can get even closer with something like a psychic power like Quicken, which allows these guys to double move. The Dark Matter Crystal from Zangors, which allows them to redeploy, or something like Genestealers, which are able to double move as well. So what I would do in that instance is a couple of things. Now, I do have an elite unit of Deathwatch here, which are fantastic, and they've got a really cool stratagem to actually kill these Shining Spears, but I don't think that'll be a good example to show you, because that's very situational to just Deathwatch. So what you could do on this instance is, you've got 2 options. You can either screen the tank with a unit. So then, yeah, what's going to happen is, so if this tank was hidden, you're going to screen him so that the only thing that these guys can charge and attack in combat is this unit, okay? And again, you want to make sure they're out of line of sight so they can't be shot, but just showing you for an example. Yes, you can screen and you'll probably lose them. And yes, you'll have to forfeit your tank getting tagged. However, providing you've left yourself room to fall back, you can then, if you've got something like a knight, which is able to move across, still fire over at the rest of the board, you can then maximize his efficiencies, it also being a combat monster, charge in and kill this unit. So we call that a counter unit. Okay, so this could be a unit of, let's say, 10 Terminators that's sat on your backfield shooting at long range, or at 24, and then they counter punch, okay? Or it could be a watch captain, or whatever it might be, some sort of hard-hitting unit that's very good in combat, that can literally sit, protect, and then countercharge this unit. So yes, I might not be able to use my tank for a turn, but that does mean he's now sacrificed a 300-point unit of Shining Spears just to stop me from shooting once, which for me is actually a pretty good trade as that defender. Now, the other option is, let's say, for example, you want to make sure that your tank commander doesn't get charged at all. What you can always do is double wrap. Now, again, this needs to be something really important for you to actually be willing to do this with. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You've got one unit there. And you need to leave yourself some room. Okay. But you're not going to leave more than an inch gap between your models. Then what you're going to do, and I'd probably keep them about an inch away from this guy. Just over an inch. And then with your next unit, you're going to put them here. Bigger. And you're going to put those over 4 inches away from the Tank Commander. So now what you've done, this double layer means that, yes, you'll lose this one unit of screen. Okay, you will lose these guys. Let's say they double move. And you want to make sure as well that you've left, the reason why the gap between the two units needs to actually be quite small is because if they move again, they can jump over you. So what you need to make sure is that you've basically left, if this base is an 1.5 inches wide, they're not able to get within an inch of either unit. So now you've got 3.5 inches. So as long as you've left 3 inches between this unit, they're not allowed to jump over because they're now going to be within an inch either side. And I'll just make that very clear to your opponent, okay? That forces now your opponent to hit this unit. And yes, you would lose them in combat, but that's okay. So you lose them. They then now pile in or consolidate 3 inches, but they don't actually have the range to actually tag this unit either. So now, and if for example they were a Genestealer unit or a unit that, so let's say that was a unit that can actually consolidate even further, like 6 inches, then the worst is, in this scenario, my guys here aren't even on combat, so these guys can actually still shoot. But if they are a really, really heavy hitting unit that can double move, they're super quick, they can kill a unit the first time it hits it, and also they can consolidate up to 6 inches, then okay, they pile into this unit here. Now, because they didn't declare a charge against them, again, if they didn't declare a charge against them, they can't fight twice and fight these guys. I then get to basically move forward, pile in, and hit them back. They might lose a couple, and now they're nowhere near within an inch of my Tank Commander, and he is still able to fire perfectly and then systematically shoot these combat threat away. So I hope you enjoyed that video, guys, and remember those things that I've first of all showed you. Number one is, can you put a unit outside of its maximum movement advance and then over 13 inches away or 12.1 inches away? That means that they're not going to be able to declare a charge against you. Second of all, do you use a screen and make sure you are able to use a counter punch unit? And finally, number three, to double wrap, and then making sure that you do not allow a unit to move over and in between your unit. So I just really hope you enjoyed that video and you took plenty from it, and good luck next time you're at the table.